All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's get settled, get comfortable, pull up a book, and grab a drink. Because we have a story to finish tonight. Welcome back. I did not flip over our book. One moment, please. We finished that last night. There we are. So, as I hinted, we finished The Lord of the Rings last night. The Fellowship of the Ring, I should say. And tonight, we have the privilege of also finishing Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars. This is the first book in the Barsoom series, the otherwise probably more well-known by its titular character, well, not titular, but its central character, John Carter of Mars. We've had some ups and downs with John. He's something of a character. His background is less forgiving than I would usually associate with a character that I can relate with or enjoy their antics. A veteran, or a Confederate veteran of the Civil War from Virginia, with all of the associated connotations. And then, after that, a prospector out for a gold rush in the West, who had the misfortune of being portrayed as rather in line with contemporary sentiment against the natives, shall we say. So that was a less than flattering initial introduction that we had to this character. And as we've gone, he has been the epitome of a Larry Stew. Harry Stew? Whatever it ends up being. Things just seem to work for him. He's thrown into awkward problems, and I think this was written a little bit before Lost Cause started to come into vogue. This was still in the era of the Reconstruction and carpetbaggers. So I think Lost Cause is more of a modern retelling of things to paint a better picture of the cause of the South and the ideals of the Southern gentlefolk. Which is obviously all bullshit, but you're right. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of it thrown in. This was written in, I think, around 1919 or so, so it's possible to see some of that. I think that was around the point when it was a little bit before, like, the Sisters of the Confederacy started putting up statues in places that have no business having Confederate statues. But, yeah, not too far off. Not too far off. So, it does have a little bit of the romanticizing of things, but, thankfully, most of the story takes place well away from Earth and familiar environments and all their attachments. There is, however, some unfortunate sort of colonialist undertones going on, wherein John is very, very much the superior specimen, and can do no wrong, and is a bit of a white savior complex going on. Let's try and glaze over that, because I don't think this was meant to be given as such. This is very much an early example of pulp sci-fi. A little bit predating sci-fi in general, but pulp fiction. It is meant to be read head empty, not to be deconstructed. It is meant to be enjoyed as entertainment. And it's not really in your face. It just has some unfortunate vibes that were in line with the common thought at the time of its writing. It's not like Edgar Rice Burroughs was some counterculturalist pushing an agenda. No, he was just a guy working at a print shop and writing in his spare time. So, I'm willing to forgive a lot, because the story is fun, in a turn your brain off, watch TV sort of fun. And sometimes, those are just what we need. So, with the preamble out of the way, and with the reminder that separating art from artist is fine when the artist is dead. So, since Edgar Rice Burroughs has gone beyond, it's okay to separate that out from any potential misgivings that we might have. So, let's jump back in to where we were. Yeah, it's definitely much more just of how things were at the time. Not necessarily that it was an individual viewpoint. No, it was just how things were. That's not to say that things aren't better now because those thoughts are generally looked down upon by those that we prefer to associate with. But okay, yes, it is better. It is better that those thoughts are looked down upon. But anyway, product of the times, not necessarily an example that stuck out at the time. So, a little bit of forbearance is due. All right. That's way too close to being political. So let's go ahead and get back into our books. Shifting over to our reading nook, we don't have a whole lot left to us tonight. This is a shorter book than some others that we've read, and we are about 20% away from the end. And if we keep on the pace that we've been going, we should finish this without any trouble at or around our normal finishing time. So, let's dive back in and see how things will go, because you may remember John was having a bit of an issue rescuing his princess, because Martians don't lie, and she's promised herself to another thinking that John was dead. And also, he may have murdered a squadron of guards, and may be just, hiding about in the castle or the palace, and maybe have, betrayed a trust that was implicit when he was assigned to be the guard of the Jadak. John's not exactly a paragon of virtue here. Actually, I wonder if this is sort of an example of him being sort of an anti-hero. And I wonder how many examples of anti-heroes there are at this point in time. It's because he's virtuous in his own way, but he's not like, when you think of somebody, like, he's not an upstanding, shining example of morals. No, he just does his own thing. Research for another time. Alright, so let's get back into chapter 23. Lost in the Sky. Without effort at concealment, I hastened to the vicinity of our quarters, where I felt sure I should find Kanto's can. As I neared the building, I became more careful, as I judged, and rightly, that the place would be guarded. Several men in civilian metal loitered near the front entrance, and in the rear were others. My only means of reaching, unseen, the upper story, where our apartments were situated, was through an adjoining building, and under considerable maneuvering I managed to attain the roof of a shop several doors away. Leaping from roof to roof, I soon reached an open window in the building where I hoped to find the heliumite, and in another moment I stood in the room before him. He was alone and showed no surprise at my coming, saying he had expected me much earlier, as my tour of duty must have ended some time since. I saw that he knew nothing of the events of the day at the palace, and when I had enlightened him, he was all excitement. The news that Dejah Thoris had promised her hand to Sab Than filled him with dismay. "It cannot be!" he exclaimed. "It is impossible! Why, no man in all Helium would prefer death to the selling of our loved princess to the ruling house of Zidanga. She must have lost her mind to have assented to such an atrocious bargain. You, who do not know how we of Helium love the members of our ruling house cannot appreciate the horror with which I contemplate such an unholy alliance. What can be done, John Carter? He continued. You're a resourceful man. Can you not think of some way to save Helium from this disgrace? If I can come within sword's reach of Sabthan, I answered, I can solve the difficulty insofar as Helium is concerned. But, for personal reasons, I would prefer that another struck the blow that frees Deja Thoris. Cantos Can eyed me narrowly before he spoke. You love her, he said. Does she know it? She knows it, Cantos Can, and repulses me only because she is promised to Sabthan. The splendid fellow sprang to his feet, and grasping me by the shoulder, raised his sword on high, exclaiming, And had the choice been left to me, I could not have chosen a more fitting mate for the first princess of Barsoom. Here is my hand upon your shoulder, John Carter, and my word that Sabthan shall go out at the point of my sword for the sake of my love for Helium, for Deja Thoris, and for you. This very night I shall try to reach his quarters in the palace. How? I asked. You are strongly guarded, and a quadruple force patrols the sky. He bent his head in thought a moment, then raised it with an air of confidence. I only need to pass these guards, and I can do it, he said at last. I know a secret entrance to the palace through the pinnacle of the highest tower. I fell upon it by chance one day as I was passing above the palace on patrol duty. In this work it is required that we investigate any unusual occurrence we may witness. And as a face peering from the pinnacle of the high tower of the palace was, to me, most unusual, I therefore drew near and discovered that the possessor of the peering face was none other than Sabthan. He was slightly put out at being detected, and commanded me to keep the matter to myself, explaining that the passage from the tower led directly to his apartments, and was known only to him. If I can reach the foot of the barracks and get my machine, I can be in Sabthan's quarters in 5 minutes. But how am I to escape from this building, guarded as you say it is? How well are the machine sheds at the barracks guarded? I asked. There is usually but one man on duty there, at night, upon the roof. Go to the roof of this building, Cantos Can, and wait me there. Without stopping to explain my plans, I retraced my way to the street and hastened to the barracks. I did not dare to enter the building, filled as it was with members of the Air Scout Squadron, who, in common with all Zodanga, were on the lookout for me. The building was an enormous one, rearing its lofty head fully 1,000 feet into the air. But few buildings in Zodanga were higher than these barracks. Though several topped it by a few hundred feet, the docks of the great battleships of the line standing some 1,500 feet from the ground, while the freight and passenger stations of the merchant squadrons rose nearly as high. It was a long climb up to the face of the building, and one fraught with much danger. But there was no other way, and so I essayed the task. The fact that Barsoomian architecture is extremely ornate made the feat much simpler than I had anticipated, since I found ornamental ledges and projections which fairly formed a perfect ladder for me all the way to the eaves of the building. Here I met my first real obstacle. The eaves projected nearly 20 feet from the wall to which I clung, and though I encircled the great building, I could find no opening through them. The top floor was alight, and filled with soldiers engaged in the pastimes of their kind. I could not, therefore, reach the roof through the building. There was one slight, desperate chance, and that I decided I must take. It was for Deja Thoris, and no man has lived who would not risk 1,000 deaths for such as she. Clinging to the wall with my feet and one hand, I loosened one of the long leather straps of my trappings, at the end of which dangled a great hook, by which air sailors are hung to the sides and bottoms of their craft for various purposes of repair, and by means of which landing parties are lowered to the ground from the battleships. I swung this hook cautiously to the roof several times before it finally found lodgment. Gently I pulled on it to strengthen its hold, but whether it would bear the weight of my body I did not know. It might be barely caught upon the very outer edge of the roof, so that as my body swung out at the end of the strap, it would slip off and launch me to the pavement 1,000 feet below. An instant, I hesitated, and then, releasing my grasp upon the supporting ornament, I swung out into space at the end of the strap. Far below me lay the brilliantly lighted streets, the hard pavements, and death. There was a little jerk at the top of the supporting eaves, and a nasty slipping, grating sound which turned me cold with apprehension. Then the hook caught, and I was safe. Quickly clambering aloft, I grasped the edge of the eaves and drew myself to the surface of the roof above. As I gained my feet, I was confronted by the sentry on duty, into the muzzle of whose revolver I found myself looking. "Who are you, and whence came you?" he cried. "I am an air scout, friend, and very near a dead one, for just by the merest chance I escaped falling to the avenue below," I replied. "But how came you upon the roof, man? No one has landed or come up from the building for the past hour. Quick, explain yourself, or I call the guard." "Look you here, sentry, and you shall see how I came and how close a shave I had to not coming at all," I answered, turning toward the edge of the roof, where, 20 feet below, at the end of my strap, hung all my weapons. The fellow, acting on impulse of curiosity, stepped to my side, and to his undoing, for as he leaned to peer over the eaves, I grasped him by his throat and his pistol arm and threw him heavily to the roof. The weapon dropped from his grasp, and my fingers choked off his attempted cry for assistance. I gagged and bound him, and then flung him over the edge of the roof, as I myself had hung a few moments before. I knew it would be morning before he would be discovered, and I needed all the time that I could gain. John consistently makes me think, this guy has very few qualms about doing literally anything for his own good. Donning my trappings and weapons, I hastened to the sheds, and soon had out both my machine and Cantos cans. Making his fast behind mine, I started my engine, and skimming over the edge of the roof, I dove down into the streets of the city, far below the plain usually occupied by the air patrol. In less than a minute, I was settling safely upon the roof of our apartment beside the astonished Cantos can. I lost no time in explanation, but plunged immediately into a discussion of our plans for the immediate future. It was decided that I was to try to make helium, while Cantos Can was to enter the palace and dispatch Sab Than. If successful, he was to follow me. He set my compass for me, a clever little device which will remain steadfastly fixed upon any given point on the surface of Barsoom. And, bidding each other farewell, we rose together and sped in the direction of the palace, which lay in the route which I must take to reach Helium. As we neared the high tower, a patrol shot down from above, throwing its piercing searchlight full upon my craft, and a voice roared out a command to halt. Following with a shot, as I paid no attention to his hail, Cantos Can dropped quickly into the darkness, while I rose steadily, and at terrific speed raced through the Martian sky, followed by a dozen of the air scout craft which had joined the pursuit, and later, by a swift cruiser carrying 100 men and a battery of rapid-fire guns. By twisting and turning my little machine, now rising and now falling, I managed to elude their searchlights, most of the time. But I was also losing ground by these tactics, and so I decided to hazard everything on a straightaway course and leave the result to fate and the speed of my machine. Cantos Can had showed me a trick of gearing, which is known only to the Navy of Helium, that greatly increased the speed of our machines. So that I felt sure I could distance my pursuers if I could dodge their projectiles for a few moments. As I sped through the air, the screeching of the bullets around me convinced me that only by a miracle could I escape. But the die was cast, and throwing on full speed, I raced a straight course toward Helium. Gradually, I left my pursuers further and further behind, and I was just congratulating myself on my lucky escape when a well-directed shot from the cruiser exploded at the prow of my little craft. concussion nearly capsized her, and with a sickening plunge, she hurtled downward through the dark night. How far I fell before I regained control of the plane, I do not know. But I must have been very close to the ground when I started to rise again, as I plainly heard the squealing of animals below me. Rising again, I scanned the heavens for my pursuers, and finally, making out their lights far behind me, saw that they were landing, evidently in search for me. Not until their lights were no longer discernible did I venture to flash my little lamp upon my compass. And then I found to my consternation that a fragment of the projectile had utterly destroyed my only guide, as well as my speedometer. It was true I could follow the stars in the general direction of Helium, but without knowing the exact location of the city or the speed at which I was traveling, my chances for finding it were slim. Helium lies 1,000 miles southwest of Zodonga, and with my compass intact, I should have made the trip, barring accidents, in between 4 and 5 hours. As it turned out, however, morning found me speeding over a vast expanse of dead sea bottom after nearly 6 hours of continuous flight at high speed. Presently, a great city showed below me. It was not Helium, as that alone of all Barsoomian metropolises consists in 2 immense circular walled cities, about 75 miles apart, and would have been easily distinguishable from the altitude at which I was flying. Believing that I had come too far to the north and west, I turned back in a southeasterly direction, passing during the forenoon several other large cities, but none resembling the description which Cantos Can had given me of Helium. In addition to the twin city formation of Helium, another distinguishing feature is the 2 immense towers, one of vivid scarlet, rising nearly a mile into the air from the center of one of the cities, while the other of bright yellow, and of the same height, marks her sister. All right, so that brings us to the end of chapter 23, wherein there's a few developments here. Chiefly, it is incredibly convenient that John has found such a good friend in his infiltration of the Zodongan capital. It's very, very convenient that said friend is fully on board with doing his dirty work for him, so that he won't be barred from marrying his princess. And very convenient that said friend had a special trick of the gearing to somehow make a speeder a little bit faster, despite it being the same hardware. Just, the Zodongan pilots don't know how to shift gears, I guess. Funny that. Yes, almost miraculous indeed. Someone has a watchful eye over John Carter of Mars. My suspicion thinks it might be the author trying to woo things together in a bit of a power fantasy of the highest order. But, these are still fun. Oh, I realized that I never posted our Go Live. Good gracious. Hang on. Let's take a moment. I'll do my socials right quick while we're in between chapters. It shouldn't take but a moment. Okay, sorry about that. So, let's... Oh, I do have one more. There's always extra work to be done, is there not? Always something else. And there's the Bluesky repost. Alright. There we go. So, let's continue on and see how this will work out now. Because John is now flying guideless across the Martian wasteland, scanning from city to city to city, trying to find a landmark, which, conveniently, the one city that he wants is the one city on Mars that has 2 concentric rings and 2 towers. So, I mean, how convenient. You can tell at a glance whether you're where you want to be or not. But we'll just add that to the pile of happy accidents. So, let's continue now with Chapter 24. Tars Tarkas finds a friend. Switching back to Tars Tarkas? About noon, I passed low over a great dead city of ancient Mars, and as I skimmed out across the plain beyond, I came full upon several thousand green warriors, engaged in a terrific battle. Scarcely had I seen them than a volley of shots was directed at me, and with the almost unfailing accuracy of their aim, my little craft was instantly a ruined wreck, sinking erratically to the ground. I fell almost directly in the center of the fierce combat, among warriors who had not seen my approach, so busily were they engaged in life-and-death struggles. The men were fighting on foot with long swords, while an occasional shot from a sharpshooter on the outskirts of the conflict would bring down a warrior who might for an instant separate himself from the entangled mass. As my machine sank among them, I realized that it was fight or die. With good chances of dying in any event. And so I struck the ground with drawn longsword ready to defend myself as I could. I fell beside a huge monster who was engaged with 3 antagonists, and as I glanced at his fierce face filled with the light of battle, I recognized Tars Tarkas the Thark. He did not see me, as I was a trifle behind him, and just then the 3 warriors opposing him, and whom I recognized as Warhoons, charged simultaneously. The mighty fellow made a quick work of one of them, but in stepping back for another thrust, he fell over a dead body behind him, and was down and at the mercy of his foes in an instant. Quick as lightning, they were upon him, and Tars Tarkas would have been gathered to his fathers in short order, had I not sprung before his prostrate form and engaged his adversaries. I had accounted for one of them, when the mighty Thark regained his feet and quickly settled the other. He gave me one look, and a slight smile touched his grim lip, as, touching my shoulder, he said, "I would scarcely recognize you, John Carter, but there is no other mortal upon Barsoom who would have done what you have for me. I think I have learned that there is such a thing as friendship, my friend." Convenient. He said no more, nor was there opportunity, for the Warhoons were closing in about us. And together we fought, shoulder to shoulder, during all that long, hot afternoon, until the tide of battle turned, and the remnant of the fierce Warhoon horde fell back upon their throats and fled into the gathering darkness. 10,000 men had been engaged in that titanic struggle, and upon the field of battle lay 3,000 dead. Neither side asked or gave quarter, nor did they attempt to take prisoners. On our return to the city after the battle, we had gone directly to Tars Tarkas' quarters, where I was left alone, while the chieftain attended to customary council which immediately follows an engagement. As I sat awaiting the return of the Green Warrior, I heard something move in an adjoining apartment, and as I glanced up, there rushed suddenly upon me a huge and hideous creature which bore me backward upon the pile of silks and furs upon which I had been reclining. It was Woola, the faithful, loving Woola. He had found his way back to Thark and, as Tars Tarkas later told me, had gone immediately to my former quarters, where he had taken up his pathetic and seemingly hopeless watch for my return. "Tal-Hashus knows that you are here, John Carter," said Tars Tarkas on his return from the Jedak's quarters. "Tharkoja saw and recognized you as we were returning. Tal-Hashus has ordered me to bring you before him tonight. I have 10 thoats, John Carter. You may take your choice from among them, and I will accompany you to the nearest waterway that leads to Helium. Tars Tarkas may be a cruel green warrior, but he can be a friend as well. Come, we must start." "And when you return, Tars Tarkas?" I asked. "The wild Calots, possibly, or worse," he replied. "Unless I should chance to have the opportunity I have so long waited of battling with Tal-Hashus." "We will stay, Tars Tarkas, and see Tal-Hashus tonight. You shall not sacrifice yourself, and it may be that tonight you can have the chance you wait." He objected strenuously, saying that Tal-Hashus often flew into wild fits of passion at the mere thought of the blow I had dealt him, and that if ever he laid his hands upon me, I would be subjected to the most horrible tortures. While we were eating, I repeated to Tars Tarkas the story which Sola had told me that night upon the sea bottom, during the march to Thark. He said but little, but the great muscles of his face worked in passion and in agony at recollection of the horrors which had been heaped upon the only thing he had ever loved in all his cold, cruel, terrible existence. He no longer demurred when I suggested that we go before Tal-Hashus, only saying that he would like to speak to Sarkoja first. At his request, I accompanied him to her quarters, and the look of venomous hatred she cast upon me was almost adequate recompense for any future misfortunes this accidental return to Thark might bring me. "Sarkoja," said Tars Tarkas, 40 years ago you were instrumental in bringing about the torture and death of a woman named Gozava. I have just discovered that the warrior who loved that woman has learned of your part in the transaction. He may not kill you, Sarkoja. It is not our custom. There is nothing to prevent him tying one end of a strap about your neck and the other end to a wild thoat, merely to test your fitness to survive and help perpetuate our race. Having heard that he would do this on the morrow, I thought it only right to warn you, for I am a just man. The River Is but a short pilgrimage, Sarkoja. Come, John Carter." The next morning, Sarkoja was gone, nor was she ever seen after. In silence, we hastened to the Jedak's palace, where we were immediately admitted to his presence. In fact, he could scarcely wait to see me, and was standing erect upon his platform, glowering at the entrance as I came in. "Strap him to that pillar!" he shrieked. "We shall see who it is that dares strike the mighty Tal-Hashus! Heat the irons with my own hands! I shall burn the eyes from his head, that he may not pollute my person with his vile gaze!" "Chieftains of Thark," I cried, turning to the assembled council and ignoring Tal-Hashus, "I have been a chief among you, and today I have fought for Thark shoulder to shoulder with her greatest warrior. You owe me, at least, a hearing. I have won that much today. You claim to be a just people." "Silence!" roared Tal-Hashus. "Gag the creature and bind him as I command." "Justice, Tal-Hashus," exclaimed Lorcus Tumel. "Who are you to set aside the customs of ages among the Tharks?" "Yes, justice!" echoed a dozen voices. And so, while Tal-Hashus fumed and frothed, I continued. "You are a brave people, and you love bravery, but where was your mighty Jedak during the fighting today? I did not see him in the thick of battle. He was not there. He rends defenseless women and little children in his lair, but how recently has one of you seen him fight with men? Why, even I, a midget beside him, felled him with a single blow of my fist. Is it of such that the Tharks fashion their Jedaks? There stands beside me now a great Thark, a mighty warrior and a noble man, chieftains. How sounds Tars Tarkas, Jedak of Thark?" A roar of deep-toned applause greeted this suggestion. It but remains for this council to command, and Talhagius must prove his fitness to rule. Were he a brave man, he would invite Tarstarchus to combat, for he does not love him. But Talhagius is afraid. Talhagius, your Jadak, is a coward. With my bare hands I could kill him, and he knows it. After I ceased, there was a tense silence, as all eyes were riveted upon Talhagius. He did not speak or move, but the blotchy green of his countenance turned livid, and the froth froze upon his lips. "Talhagius," said Lorcastomel in a cold, hard voice, "never in my long life have I seen a Jadak of the Tharks so humiliated. There could be but one answer to this arraignment. We waited." And still, Talhagius stood as though petrified. "Chieftains," continued Lorcastomel, "shall the Jadak, Talhagius, prove his fitness to rule over Tarstarchus?" There were 20 chieftains about the rostrum, and 20 swords flashed high in assent. There was no alternative. That decree was final. And so, Talhagius drew his longsword and advanced to meet Tarstarchus. The combat was soon over, and with his foot upon the neck of the dead monster, Tarstarchus became Jadak among the Tharks. His first act was to make me a full-fledged chieftain, with the rank I had won by my combats the first few weeks of my captivity among them. Seeing the favorable disposition of the warriors toward Tarstarchus, as well as toward me, I grasped the opportunity to enlist them in my cause against Zidanga. I told Tarstarchus the story of my adventures, and in a few words had explained to him the thought I had in mind. Yeah, we don't even get a description of the fight, which is very disappointing, honestly, because Tarstarchus is a good character. But I guess we have to remember that this book is written from the perspective of basically John writing his own memoirs, and if there's anyone who is entirely self-centered, it's John Carter. There are two things in John Carter's mind: John Carter and the love of John Carter, whose own value is pegged upon the fact that John Carter loves her. He's a wee bit of a narcissist, I believe. "John Carter has made a proposal," he said, addressing the council, "which meets with my sanction. I shall put it to you briefly. Deja Thoris, the Princess of Helium, who was our prisoner, is now held by the Jadak of Zidanga, whose son she must wed to save her country from devastation at the hands of the Zidangan forces. John Carter suggests that we rescue her and return her to Helium. The loot of Zidanga would be magnificent, and I have often thought that had we an alliance with the people of Helium, we could obtain sufficient assurance of sustenance to permit us to increase the size and frequency of our hatchings, and thus become unquestionably supreme among the green men of all Barsoom. What say you?" It was a chance to fight, an opportunity to loot, and they rose to the bait as a speckled trout to a fly. For Tharks, they were wildly enthusiastic, and before another half-hour had passed, 20 mounted messengers were speeding across Dead Sea bottoms to call the hordes together for the expedition. In 3 days, we were on the march towards Zidanga, 100,000 strong, as Tarstarchus had been able to enlist the services of 3 smaller hordes, on the promise of the great loot of Zidanga. At the head of the column, I rode beside the great Thark, while at the heels of my mount trotted my beloved Woola. I guess there are 3 things that John Carter loves: John Carter, Deja Thoris, and Woola. Which, fair point. A man and his ugly Martian dog shall not be separated. We traveled entirely by night, timing our marches so that we camped during the day at deserted cities where, even to the beasts, we were all kept indoors during the daylight hours. On the march, Tars Tarkas, through his remarkable ability and statesmanship, enlisted 50,000 more warriors from various hordes, so that 10 days after we set out, we halted at midnight outside the great walled city of Zodonga, 150,000 strong. The fighting strength and efficiency of this horde of ferocious green monsters was equivalent to 10 times their number of red men. Never in the history of Barsoom, Tars Tarkas told me, had such a force of green warriors marched to battle together. It was a monstrous task to keep even a semblance of harmony among them, and it was a marvel to me that he got them to the city without a mighty battle among themselves. But, as we neared Zodonga, their personal quarrels were submerged by their greater hatred for the Red Men, and especially for the Zodongans, who had for years waged a ruthless campaign of extermination against the Green Men, directing special attention toward despoiling their incubators. How convenient that the Zodongans are assholes. It may be just to start a genocidal war. Oh, wait, hold on. Hang on. I guess not. John Carter, what are you doing? Now that we were before Zodonga, the task of obtaining entry to the city devolved upon me, and directing Tars Tarkas to hold his forces in 2 divisions out of earshot of the city, with each division opposite a large gateway. I took 20 dismounted warriors and approached one of the small gates that pierced the walls at short intervals. These gates have no regular guard, but are covered by sentries, who patrol the avenue that encircles the city just within the walls, as our metropolitan police patrol their beats. That's fair. It's one thing for me to say something. It's another thing entirely for it to be down in text. The walls of Zodonga are 75 feet in height and 50 feet thick. They are built of enormous blocks of carborundum, and the task of entering the city seemed, to my escort of green warriors, an impossibility. The fellows who had been detailed to accompany me were of one of the smaller hordes, and therefore did not know me. Placing 3 of them, with their faces to the wall and arms locked, I commanded 2 more to mount to their shoulders, and a 6th I ordered to climb upon the shoulders of the upper 2. The head of the topmost warrior towered over 40 feet from the ground. In this way, with 10 warriors, I built a series of 3 steps from the ground to the shoulders of the topmost man. Then, starting from a short distance behind them, I ran swiftly up from one tier to the next, and with a final bound from the broad shoulders at the highest, I clutched the top of the great wall, and quietly drew myself to its broad expanse. After me, I dragged 6 lengths of leather from an equal number of my warriors. These lengths we had previously fastened together, and passing one end to the topmost warrior, I lowered the other end cautiously over the opposite side of the wall toward the avenue below. No one was in sight. So, lowering myself to the end of my leather strap, I dropped the remaining 30 feet to the pavement below. I had learned from Cantos Can the secret of opening these gates, and in another moment my 20 great fighting men stood within the doomed city of Zodonga. I found to my delight that I had entered at the lower boundary of the enormous palace grounds. The building itself showed in the distance a blaze of glorious light, and, on the instant, I determined to lead a detachment of warriors directly within the palace itself, while the balance of the great horde was attacking the barracks of the soldiery. Dispatching one of my men to Tars Tarkas for a detail of 50 Tharks, with word of my intentions, I ordered 10 warriors to capture and open one of the great gates, while with the 9 remaining I took the other. We were to do our work quietly. No shots were to be fired, and no general advance made until I had reached the palace with my 50 Tharks. Our plans worked to perfection. The 2 sentries we met were dispatched to their fathers upon the banks of the lost sea of Chorus, and the guards at both gates followed them in silence. All right, so that brings the end of chapter 24, wherein, coincidentally, as John was flying lost across the Martian wasteland, he was shot down. But wouldn't you know, he was shot down in the middle of a battlefield where his old enemies, the Warhoomians, were fighting the tribe that he was first encountered upon Mars, the Tharks. And he was reunited with the first Martian who found him, Tars Tarkas, who coincidentally is one of, like, the 2 green Martians that we know of who have the seedling of a conscience. So, after coincidence after coincidence and piling on things to the point of serendipity, Tars Tarkas has become the Jadak of the Tharks, and through his own personal charisma, has gathered an army of Tharks, not only of Tharks and other green Martians, to raid and loot Z'Danga, the bad guys of the red Martians. Because obviously, if there are good guys, the Heliumites, there are the bad guys, the Z'Dangans. It makes sense, a perfect sense. It's black and white here, or red and green in Mars. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue with chapter 25, wherein I expect to be a little bit of looting and plundering and a small bit of genocide. It's fine, it's fine. Nothing can really go wrong, right? John Carter. What do you get yourself up to? Alright, chapter 25. The Looting of Z'Danga. As the great gate where I stood swung open, my 50 Tharks, headed by Tars Tarkas himself, rode in upon their mighty thoats. I led them to the palace walls, which I negotiated easily, without assistance. Once inside, however, the gate gave me considerable trouble, but I finally was rewarded by seeing it swing open upon its huge hinges. And soon my fierce escort was riding across the gardens of the Jadak of Z'Danga. As we approached the palace, I could see through the great windows of the first floor into the brilliantly illuminated audience chamber of Thankosis. The immense hall was crowded with nobles and their women, and as though some important function was in progress. There was not a guard in sight without the palace, due, I presume, to the fact that the city and palace walls were considered impregnable. And so I came close and peered within. At one end of the chamber, upon massive golden thrones encrusted with diamonds, sat Thankosis and his consort, surrounded by officers and dignitaries of state. Before them stretched a broad aisle, lined on either side with soldiery. And as I looked, there entered this aisle at the far end of the hall, the head of a procession which advanced to the foot of the throne. First, there marched 4 officers of the Jadak's guard, bearing a huge salver, on which reposed, upon a cushion of scarlet silk, a great golden chain, with a collar and padlock at each end. Directly behind these officers came 4 others, carrying a similar salver, which supported the magnificent ornaments of a prince and princess of the reigning house of Z'Danga. At the foot of the throne, these 2 parties separated and halted, facing each other at opposite sides of the aisle. Then came more dignitaries, and the officers of the palace and of the army, and finally, 2 figures entirely muffled in scarlet silk, so that not a feature of either was discernible. These 2 stopped at the foot of the throne, facing Thankosis. When the balance of the procession had entered, and assumed their stations, Thankosis addressed the couple standing below him. I could not hear his words, but presently 2 officers advanced and removed the scarlet robe from one of the figures, and I saw that Kantos Kan had failed in his mission. It was Sab Than, Prince of Zodonga who stood revealed before me. Is this the moment where we get John Carter to say, I object to this marriage? Because that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing a Martian wedding at... a Martian shotgun wedding, such as it goes. So, this is your chance. This is your chance, your big moment, John Carter. Then Kosis now took a set of the ornaments from one of the salvers and placed one of the collars of gold about his son's neck, springing the padlock fast. After a few more words addressed to Sabthan, he turned to the other figure, from which the officers now removed the enshrouding silks, disclosing to my now comprehending view Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium. The object of the ceremony was clear to me. In another moment, Dejah Thoris would be joined forever to the Prince of Zodonga. It was an impressive and beautiful ceremony, I presume, but to me it seemed the most fiendish sight I had ever witnessed. And as the ornaments were adjusted upon her beautiful figure, and her collar of gold swung open in the hands of Thankosis, I raised my longsword above my head, and with the heavy hilt I shattered the glass of the great window and sprang into the midst of the astonished assemblage. With a bound I was on the steps of the platform beside Thankosis, and as he stood riveted with surprise, I brought my longsword down upon the golden chain that would have bound Dejah Thoris to another. In an instant, all was confusion. 1,000 drawn swords menaced me from every quarter, and Sabthan sprang upon me with a jeweled dagger he had drawn from his nuptial ornaments. I could have killed him as easily as I might fly, but the age-old custom of Barsoom stayed my hand, and grasping his wrist as the dagger flew toward my heart, I held him as though in a vice with my longsword pointed to the far end of the hall. "Zodonga has fallen!" I cried. "Look!" All eyes turned in the direction I had indicated, and there, forging through the portals of the entranceway, rode Tars Tarkas and his 50 warriors on their great thoats. A cry of alarm and amazement broke from the assemblage, but no word of fear, and in a moment the soldiers and nobles of Zodonga were hurling themselves upon the advancing Tharks. Thrusting Sabthan headlong from the platform, I drew Dejah Thoris to my side. Behind the throne was a narrow doorway, and in this Thankosis now stood facing me, with drawn longsword. In an instant we were engaged, and I found no mean antagonist. As we circled upon the broad platform, I saw Sabthan rushing up the steps to aid his father. But as he raised his hand to strike, Dejah Thoris sprang before him, and then my sword found the spot that made Sabthan Jadak of Zodonga. As his father rolled dead upon the floor, the new Jadak tore himself free from Dejah Thoris's grasp, and again we faced each other. He was soon joined by a quartet of officers, and with my back against a golden throne, I fought once again for Dejah Thoris. I was hard-pressed to defend myself, and yet not strike down Sabthan, and with him my last chance to win the woman I loved. My blade was swinging with the rapidity of lightning as I sought to parry the thrusts and cuts of my opponents. 2 I disarmed, and 1 was down, when several more rushed to the aid of their new ruler, and to avenge the death of the old. I think this might be the... Yeah, this is the cover page art. Very dynamic. As they advanced, there were cries of, "The woman! The woman! Strike her down! It is her plot! Kill her! Kill her!" Calling to Dejah Thoris to get behind me, I worked my way toward the little doorway, back of the throne. But the officers realized my intentions, and 3 of them sprang in behind me and blocked my chances for gaining a position where I could have defended Dejah Thoris against an army of swordsmen. The Tharks were having their hands full in the center of the room, and I began to realize that nothing short of a miracle could save Dejah Thoris and myself, when I saw Tars Tarkas surging through the crowd of pygmies that swarmed about him. With one swing of his mighty longsword, he laid a dozen corpses at his feet. And so he hewed a pathway before him until, in another moment, he stood upon the platform beside me, dealing death and destruction right and left. The bravery of the Zodongans was awe-inspiring. Not one attempted to escape, and when the fighting ceased, it was because only Tharks remained alive in the Great Hall, other than Dejah Thoris and myself. Sabthan lay dead beside his father, and the corpses of the flower of Zodongan nobility and chivalry covered the floor of the bloody shambles. My first thought, when the battle was over, was for Kantos Kan, and leaving Dejah Thoris in charge of Tars Tarkas, I took a dozen warriors and hastened to the dungeons beneath the palace. The jailers had all left to join the fighters in the throne room, so we searched the labyrinthine prison without opposition. I called Kantos Kan's name aloud in each new corridor and compartment, and finally, I was rewarded by hearing a faint response. Guided by the sound, we soon found him, helpless in a dark recess. He was overjoyed at seeing me, and to know the meaning of the fight, faint echoes of which had reached his prison cell. He told me that the air patrol had captured him before he reached the high tower of the palace, so that he had not even seen Sabthan. We discovered that it would be futile to attempt to cut away the bars and chains which held him prisoner. So, at his suggestion, I returned to search the bodies on the floor above for keys to open the padlocks of his cell and of his chains. Fortunately, among the first I examined, I found his jailer, and soon we had Kantos Kan with us in the throne room. The sounds of heavy firing mingled with shouts and cries came to us from the city streets, and Tars Tarkas hastened away to direct the fighting without. Kantos Kan accompanied him to act as guide, the Green Warriors commencing a thorough search of the palace for other Zodongans and for loot, and Dejah Thoris and I were left alone. She had sunk into one of the golden thrones, and as I turned to her, she greeted me with a wan smile. "Was there ever such a man?" she exclaimed. "I know that Barsoom has never before seen your like. Can it be that all Earthmen are as you? Alone, a stranger, hunted, threatened, persecuted. You have done in a few short months what, in all the ages past of Barsoom, no man has ever done. Joined together the wild hordes of the sea bottoms and brought them to fight as allies of a red Martian people." "The answer is easy, Dejah Thoris," I replied, smiling. "It was not I who did it. It was love. Love for Dejah Thoris, a power that would work greater miracles than this you have seen." A pretty flush overspread her face, and she answered, "You may say that now, John Carter, and I may listen, for I am free." "And more still I have to say, ere it is again too late," I returned. "I have done many strange things in my life, many things that wiser men would not have dared, but never in my wildest fancies have I dreamed of winning a Dejah Thoris for myself, for never had I dreamed that in all the universe dwelt such a woman as the Princess of Helium. That you are a princess does not abash me, but that you are you is enough to make me doubt my sanity as I ask you, my princess, to be mine." "He does not need to be abashed, who so well knew the answer to his plea before the plea were made," she replied, rising and placing her dear hands upon my shoulders. And so I took her in my arms and kissed her. And thus, in the midst of a city of wild conflict, filled with the alarms of war, with death and destruction reaping their terrible harvest around her, did Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium, true daughter of Mars, the god of war, promise herself in marriage to John Carter, gentleman of Virginia. Oh yes, very romantic, John Carter. You're standing about ankle-deep in blood of everyone who was alive before you'd shown up. Yes, that's absolutely perfect. That's the best way to propose. I know it's a gallant rescue and all in a shotgun wedding on Mars, but my man, I don't think that's exactly the sort of knight in shining armor that most women would dream of. All right, we are about halfway through tonight's reading, so let's go ahead and take a short break. And we will, yeah, it depends on who you're proposing to, I guess. Let's go ahead and take a short break, top up our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be back in just a little bit for the last rush through the end of A Princess of Mars. All right, we are back. Okay, so we have just a few chapters. Let's look ahead and see how many chapters we have left. Because we're coming through on 26. Oh, okay. So 3 chapters left tonight. So we should be finishing up without too much trouble tonight. We're about at 89% right now, with probably a couple pages at the end for the Gutenberg terms and such. So we should be getting through without too much trouble in just a little while. So let's continue, because John Carter has been reunited with Deja Thoris, with Tars Tarkas, and, perhaps most importantly of all, with Woola. Yeah, that's right. I went there. Woola, most important being on Mars. Not going to change my mind. So, let's see how, following the spectacularly romantic proposal that John Carter did, bathed in the blood of his enemies, let's see how things go from here. And so, chapter 26, Through Carnage to Joy. Sometime later, Tars Tarkas and Kantos Kan returned to report that Z'danga had been completely reduced. Her forces were entirely destroyed or captured, and no further resistance was to be expected from within. Several battleships had escaped, but there were thousands of war and merchant vessels under guard of Thark warriors. The lesser hordes had commenced looting and quarreling among themselves, so it was decided that we collect what warriors we could, man as many vessels as possible with Z'dangan prisoners, and make for Helium without further loss of time. 5 hours later, we sailed from the roofs of the dock buildings with a fleet of 250 battleships, carrying nearly 100,000 green warriors, followed by a fleet of transports with our thoats. Behind us, we left the stricken city in the fierce and brutal clutches of some 40,000 green warriors of the lesser hordes. They were looting, murdering, and fighting amongst themselves. In 100 places they had applied the torch, and columns of dense smoke were rising above the city as though to blot out from the eye of heaven the horrid sights beneath. You're really not convincing me that you were the good guys in this, John Carter. In the middle of the afternoon, we sighted the scarlet and yellow towers of Helium, and a short time later, a great fleet of Z'dangan battleships rose from the camps of the besiegers without the city and advanced to meet us. The banners of Helium had been strung from stem to stern of each of our mighty craft, but the Z'dangans did not need this sign to realize that we were enemies, for our green Martian warriors had opened fire upon them almost as they left the ground. With their uncanny marksmanship, they raked the oncoming fleet with volley after volley. The twin cities of Helium, perceiving that we were friends, sent out hundreds of vessels to aid us, and then began the first real air battle I had ever witnessed. The vessels carrying our green warriors were kept circling above the contending fleets of Helium and Z'danga, since their batteries were useless in the hands of the Tharks, who, having no navy, have no skill in naval gunnery. Their small arm fire, however, was most effective, and the final outcome of the engagement was strongly influenced, if not wholly determined, by their presence. At first, the two forces circled at the same altitude, pouring broadside after broadside into each other. Presently, a great hole was torn into the hull of one of the immense battlecraft from the Z'dangan camp. With a lurch, she turned completely over, the little figures of her crew plunging, turning, and twisting toward the ground 1,000 feet below. Then, with sickening velocity, she tore after them, almost completely burying herself in the soft loam of the ancient sea bottom. With a wild cry of exultation arose from the Heliumite squadron, and with a redoubled ferocity, they fell upon the Zitongan fleet. By a pretty maneuver, 2 of the vessels of Helium gained a position above their adversaries, from which they poured upon them from their keel bomb batteries, a perfect torrent of exploding bombs. Then, one by one, the battleships of Helium succeeded in rising above the Zidongans, and in a short time, a number of the beleaguering battleships were drifting hopeless wrecks toward the high scarlet tower of Greater Helium. Several others attempted to escape, but they were soon surrounded by thousands of tiny individual flyers, and above each hung a monster battleship of Helium ready to drop boarding parties upon their decks. This is actually kind of cool. The portrayal of the aerial battle as a sort of pseudo naval battle with the added dimension of being able to go up and down. It kind of is reminiscent of like early depictions of space combat, without the, miles and hundreds of miles of distance involved. And you definitely see the sort of influences of the golden age of piracy naval battles sort of thing, but just transported to Mars and in the air above Mars. Like flying Spanish galleons fighting it out. Within but little more than an hour from the moment the victorious Zidongan squadron had risen to meet us from the camp of the besiegers, the battle was over, and the remaining vessels of the conquered Zidongans were headed toward the cities of Helium under prize crews. There was an extremely pathetic side to the surrender of these mighty flyers, the result of an age-old custom which demanded that surrender should be signalized by the voluntary plunging to the earth of the commander of the vanquished vessel. Okay. One after another, the brave fellows holding their colors high above their heads leaped from the towering bows of their mighty craft to an awful death. It's kind of the opposite of Captain going down with his ship, huh? Captain going down without his ship. Not until the commander of the entire fleet took the fearful plunge, thus indicating the surrender of the remaining vessels, did the fighting cease. And the useless sacrifice of brave men come to an end. We now signaled the flagship of Helium's navy to approach, and when she was within hailing distance, I called out that we had the Princess Deja Thoris on board, and that we wished to transfer her to the flagship, that she might be taken immediately to the city. Yeah, I have the advantage on making these jokes. The delay in stream delay gives me about 5 seconds to come up with something before the audience. As the full import of my announcement bore in upon them, a great cry arose from the decks of the flagship, and a moment later the colors of the Princess of Helium broke from 100 points upon her upper works. When the other vessels of the squadron caught the meaning of the signals flashed them, they took up the wild acclaim and unfurled her colors in the gleaming sunlight. The flagship bore down upon us, and as she swung gracefully to and touched our side, a dozen officers sprang upon our decks. As their astonished gaze fell upon the hundreds of green warriors who now came forth from the fighting shelters, they stopped aghast. But at sight of Kantos Kan, who advanced to meet them, they came forward, crowding about him. Deja Thoris and I then advanced, and they had no eyes for other than her. She received them gracefully, calling each by name, for they were men high in the esteem and service of her grandfather, and she knew them well. "Lay your hands upon the shoulder of John Carter," she said to them, turning toward me, "the man whom Helium owes her princess, as well as her victory today." They were very courteous to me, and said many kind and complimentary things, but what seemed to impress them most was that I had won the aid of the fierce Tharks in my campaign for the liberation of Deja Thoris and the relief of Helium. "You owe your thanks to another man than to me," I said, "and here he is. Meet one of Barsoom's greatest soldiers and statesmen, Tars Tarkas, Jadak of Thark. With the same polished courtesy that had marked their manner toward me, they extended their greetings to the great Thark. Nor, to my surprise, was he much behind them in ease of bearing or in courtly speech. Though not a garrulous race, the Tharks are extremely formal, and their ways lend themselves amazingly to dignified and courtly manners. Dejathorus went aboard the flagship, and was much put out that I would not follow. But as I explained to her, the battle was but partly won. We still had the land forces of the besieging Zidongans to account for, and I would not leave Tars Tarkas until that had been accomplished. The commander of the naval forces of Helium promised to arrange to have the armies of Helium attack from the city in conjunction with our land attack. And so the vessels separated, and Dejathorus was borne in triumph back to the court of her grandfather, Tardos Mors, Jadak of Helium. In the distance lay our fleet of transports, with the thoats of the Green Warriors where they had remained during the battle. Without landing stages, it was to be a difficult matter to unload these beasts upon the open plain, but there was nothing else for it. And so we put out for a point about 10 miles from the city and began the task. Hold on. You just cleared out the Air Force, the Navy, of the Zidongans. Do you really need to land everybody and have a dramatic cavalry charge? Just press the advantage. You just bomb them. I know it doesn't work so well for the US. We're bad at that. But I mean, come on. This isn't an entrenched position. They're just out on the field. Let's be real. It was necessary to lower the animals to the ground in slings, and this work occupied the remainder of the day and half the night. Twice we were attacked by parties of Zidongan cavalry, but with little loss, however, and after darkness shut down, they withdrew. As soon as the last thoat was unloaded, Tars Tarkas gave the command to advance. And in 3 parties we crept upon the Zidongan camp from the north, and the south, and the east. You know what? Dramatic honorable victory? Yeah, I forgot. John Carter was a Confederate. Honor before victory. About a mile from the main camp, we encountered their outposts, and, as had been prearranged, accepted this as the signal to charge. With wild, ferocious cries, and amidst the nasty squealing of battle-enraged thoats, we bore down upon the Zidongans. We did not catch them napping, but found a well-entrenched battle line confronting us. Time after time we were repulsed, until, toward noon, I began to fear for the result of the battle. The Zidongans numbered nearly 1,000,000 fighting men, gathered from pole to pole, wherever stretched their ribbon-like waterways, while pitted against them were less than 100,000 Green Warriors. The forces from Helium had not arrived, nor could we receive any word from them. Just at noon, we heard heavy firing all along the line between the Zidongans and the cities, and we knew then that our much-needed reinforcements had come. Again Tars Tarkas ordered the charge, and once more the mighty thoats bore their terrible riders against the ramparts of the enemy. At the same moment, the battle line of Helium surged over the opposite breastworks of the Zidongans, and in another moment they were being crushed as between 2 millstones. Yeah, let's not. How did you get through the filter there? Let's bonk that out. Thank you. All right. Nobly they fought, but in vain. The plain before the city became a veritable shambles ere the last Zidongan surrendered. But finally, the carnage ceased. The prisoners were marched back to Helium, and we entered the greater city's gates, a huge triumphal procession of conquering heroes. The broad avenues were lined with women and children, among which were the few men whose duties necessitated that they remain within the city walls during the battle. We were greeted with an endless round of applause and showered with ornaments of gold, platinum, silver, and precious jewels. The city had gone mad with joy. My fierce Tharks caused the wildest excitement and enthusiasm. Never before had an armed body of green warriors entered the gates of Helium, and that they came now as friends and allies filled the red men with rejoicing. That my poor services to Dejah Thoris had become known to the Heliumites was evidenced by the loud crying of my name, and by the loads of ornaments that were fastened upon me and my huge thoat as we passed up the avenues to the palace. For even in the face of the ferocious appearance of Woola, the populace pressed close about me. As we approached this magnificent pile, we were met by a party of officers who greeted us warmly, and requested that Tars Tarkas and his Jeds, with the Jedaks and Jeds of his wild allies, together with myself, dismount and accompany them, to receive from Tardos Mors an expression of his gratitude for our services. At the top of the great steps leading up to the main portals of the palace stood the royal party, and as we reached the lower steps, one of their number descended to meet us. He was an almost perfect specimen of manhood, tall, straight as an arrow, superbly muscled, and with the carriage and bearing of a ruler of men. I did not need to be told that he was Tardos Mors, Jadak of Helium. All right, calm down there, John. Calm down. You're there for his granddaughter, not for the granddad. The first member of our party he met was Tars Tarkas, and his first words sealed forever the new friendship between the races. "That Tardos Mors," he said earnestly, "may meet the greatest living warrior of Barsoom is a priceless honor. That he may lay his hand on the shoulder of a friend and ally is a far greater boon." "Jadak of Helium," returned Tars Tarkas, "it has remained for a man of another world to teach the green warriors of Barsoom the meaning of friendship. To him we owe the fact that the hordes of Thark can understand you, that they can appreciate and reciprocate the sentiments so graciously expressed." Tardos Mors then greeted each of the green Jedaks and Jeds, and to each spoke words of friendship and appreciation. As he approached me, he laid both hands upon my shoulders. "Welcome, my son," he said. "That you are granted, gladly, and without one word of opposition. The most precious jewel in all Helium, yes, on all Barsoom, is sufficient in earnest of my esteem." We were then presented to Mors Kajek, Jed of Lesser Helium, and father of Dejah Thoris. He had followed close behind Tardos Mors, and seemed even more affected by the meeting than had his father. He tried 12 times to express his gratitude to me, but his voice choked with emotion, and he could not speak. And yet he had, as I was to later learn, a reputation for ferocity and fearlessness as a fighter that was remarkable even upon the warlike Barsoom. In common with all Helium, he worshipped his daughter, nor could he think of what she had escaped without deep emotion. All right, we're coming up toward the end now. We have 2 chapters remaining. So we've had the breaking of the siege of Helium, and the daring rescue, and under the new leadership, the gallant, chivalrous green Martians who have gone from ravening hordes to rescuing mercenary band. It's funny how things turn about so quickly. But, you know what? If the U.S. can change every 4 years from ravening assholes to reasonably understandable diplomatic partners, I guess I can maintain the suspension of disbelief to allow for a change of leadership to change the Tharks. Man, I'm getting all sorts of political tonight. Huh. Alright. Chapter 27. From Joy to Death. 10 days, the hordes of Thark and their wild allies were feasted and entertained, and then, loaded with costly presents and escorted by 10,000 soldiers of Helium commanded by Mors Kajak, they started on the return journey to their own lands. The Jed of Lesser Helium, with a small party of nobles, accompanied them all the way to Thark to cement more closely the new bonds of peace and friendship. Sola also accompanied Tars Tarkas, her father, who, before all his chieftains, had acknowledged her as his daughter. 3 weeks later, Mors Kajak and his officers, accompanied by Tars Tarkas and Sola, returned upon a battleship that had been dispatched to Thark to fetch them in time for the ceremony which made Deja Thoris and John Carter one. For 9 years, I served in the councils and fought in the armies of Helium as a prince of the house of Tardos Mors. The people seemed never to tire of heaping honors upon me, and no day passed that did not bring some new proof of their love for my princess, the incomparable Deja Thoris. In a golden incubator upon the roof of our palace lay a snow-white egg. For nearly 5 years, 10 soldiers of the Jadak's Guard had constantly stood over it, and not a day passed when I was in the city that Deja Thoris and I did not stand hand in hand before our little shrine, planning for the future, when the delicate shell should break. Vivid in my memory is the picture of the last night we sat there, talking in low tones of the strange romance which had woven our lives together, and of this wonder which was coming to augment our happiness and fulfill our hopes. In the distance, we saw the bright white light of an approaching airship, but we attached no special significance to so common a sight. Like a bolt of lightning, it raced toward Helium until its very speed bespoke the unusual. Flashing the signals which proclaimed it a dispatch bearer for the Jadak, it circled impatiently, awaiting the tardy patrol boat which must convoy it to the palace docks. 10 minutes later, it touched at the palace. A message called me to the council chamber, which I found filling with the members of that body. On the raised platform of the throne was Tardos Mors, pacing back and forth with tense, drawn face. When all were in their seats, he turned toward us. "This morning," he said, "word reached the several governments of Barsoom that the keeper of the atmosphere plant had made no wireless report for 2 days, nor had almost ceaseless calls upon him from a score of capitals elicited a sign of response. The ambassadors of the other nations asked us to take the matter in hand and hasten the assistant keeper to the plant. All day, 1,000 cruisers had been searching for him, until just now one of them returns, bearing his dead body, which has been found in the pits beneath his house, horribly mutilated by some assassin. I do not need to tell you what this means to Barsoom. It would take months to penetrate those mighty walls. In fact, the work has already commenced, and there would be little to fear were the engine of the pumping plant to run as it should, and as they all have for hundreds of years. But the worst, we fear, has happened. The instruments show a rapidly decreasing air pressure on all parts of Barsoom. The engine has stopped. My gentlemen," he concluded, "we have at best 3 days to live." There was absolute silence for several minutes, And then a young noble arose, and with his drawn sword held high above his head, addressed Tardos Mors. The men of Helium have prided themselves that they have ever shown Barsoom how a nation of red men should live. Now is our opportunity to show them how they should die. Let us go about our duties as though 1,000 useful years still lay before us. The chamber rang with applause, and as there was nothing better to do than to allay the fears of the people by our example, we went our ways with smiles upon our faces, and sorrow gnawing at our hearts. When I returned to my palace, I found that the rumor already had reached Dejah Thoris, so I told her all that I had heard. "We have been very happy, John Carter," she said, "and I thank whatever fate overtakes us, that it permits us to die together." Hold on. So the issue is they can't get in to the air manufactory place? The same place that John Carter knows the sequence to open the doors? He can't just, go with them, open the doors for them, because he's done it before on his way out, and then say, "Okay, engineers, go figure out how to get the engine to work"? Brother, come on. This is a rather obvious plot hole, Mr. Edgar Rice Burroughs. Unless he's going to be 2 days in, and there's only a day left of air, and he's like, "Oh, wait! I remember!" John... Oh, good lord. Sorry, it's getting awful windy around here right now. So, I'm hearing it rush by my window here, and I'm like, let's hope that the balcony stays on tonight. Alright. The next 2 days brought no noticeable change in the supply of air, but on the morning of the third day, breathing became difficult at the higher altitudes of the rooftops. Wow, I can actually hear it through... I'm wearing my headphones for the monitor coming through, and I can hear the wind outside my window. Kind of crazy, actually. Oh, no, it's the thunderstorm rolling in and the rain, not so much the wind. Okay. Not about to get blown away into Oz. No, we're fine. Just gonna get washed away in the floods. That's all right. Noah will save us. All right. The next 2 days brought no noticeable change in the supply of air, but on the morning of the third day, breathing became difficult at the higher altitudes of the rooftops. The avenues and plazas of Helium were filled with people. All business had ceased. For the most part, the people looked bravely into the face of their unalterable doom. Here and there, however, men and women gave way to quiet grief. Toward the middle of the day, many of the weaker commenced to succumb, and within an hour, the people of Barsoom were sinking by thousands into the unconsciousness which precedes death by asphyxiation. Dejah Thoris and I, with the other members of the royal family, had collected in a sunken garden within an inner courtyard of the palace. We conversed in low tones, when we conversed at all, as the awe of the grim shadow of death crept over us. Even Woola seemed to feel the weight of the impending calamity, for he pressed close to Dejah Thoris and to me, whining pitifully. The little incubator had been brought from the roof of our palace, at request of Dejah Thoris. Buddy. Okay. Actually surprised that this isn't coming through the window there. Or coming through the mic. It's coming in pretty good. Alright. As it was becoming perceptibly difficult to breathe, Tardos Mors arose, saying, "Let us bid each other farewell. The days of the greatness of Barsoom are over. Tomorrow's sun will look down upon a dead world, which, through all eternity, must go swinging through the heavens, peopled not even by memories. It is the end." He stooped and kissed the women of his family, and laid his strong hand upon the shoulders of the men. As I turned sadly from him, my eyes fell upon Dejah Thoris. Her head was drooping upon her breast. To all appearances, she was lifeless. With a cry, I sprang to her and raised her in my arms. Her eyes opened and looked into mine. "Kiss me, Tron Carter," she murmured. "I love you. I love you. It is cruel that we must be torn apart. We were just starting upon a life of love and happiness." As I pressed her dear lips to mine, the old feeling of unconquerable power and authority rose in me. The fighting blood of Virginia sprang to life in my veins. Brother, the fighting blood of Virginia doesn't exactly have a winning track record. "It shall not be, my princess," I cried. There must be some way, and John Carter, who has fought his way through a strange world for love of you, will find it." And with my words there crept above the threshold of my conscious mind, a series of 9 long-forgotten sounds. This idiot is just now getting it. Dramatic timing, I suppose. Like a flash of lightning in the darkness, their full purport dawned upon me. The key to the 3 great doors of the atmosphere plant. Turning suddenly toward Tardos Mors, as I still clasped my dying love to my breast, I cried, "A flyer, Janak! Quick! Order your swiftest flyer to the palace top! I can save Barsoom yet!" He did not wait to question, but in an instant a guard was racing to the nearest dock, and though the air was thin and almost gone at the rooftop, they managed to launch the fastest one-man air scout machine that the skill of Barsoom had ever produced. Kissing Dejah Thoris a dozen times and commanding Woola, who would have followed me, to remain and guard her, I bounded with my old agility and strength to the high ramparts of the palace, and in another moment I was headed toward the goal of the hopes of all Barsoom. I had to fly low to get sufficient air to breathe, but I took a straight course across an old sea bottom, and so had to rise only a few feet above the ground. I traveled with awful velocity, for my errand was a race against time with death. The face of Dejah Thoris hung always before me. As I turned for a last look as I left the palace garden, I had seen her stagger and sink upon the ground beside the little incubator. That she had dropped into the last coma which would end in death if the air supply remained unreplenished, I well knew. And so, throwing caution to the winds, I flung overboard everything but the engine and compass, even to my ornaments, and lying on my belly along the deck with one hand on the steering wheel and the other pushing the speed lever to its last notch, I split the thin air of dying Mars with the speed of a meteor. An hour before dark, the great walls of the atmosphere plant loomed suddenly before me, and with a sickening thud, I plunged to the ground before the small door which was withholding the spark of life from the inhabitants of an entire planet. Beside the door, a great crew of men had been laboring to pierce the wall, but they had scarcely scratched the flint-like surface. And now most of them lay in the last sleep from which not even air would awaken them. Conditions seemed much worse here than at Helium, and it was with great difficulty that I breathed at all. There were a few men still conscious, and to one of these I spoke. "If I can open these doors, is there a man who can start the engines?" I asked. "I can," he replied, "if you open quickly. I can last but a few moments more, but it is useless. They are both dead, and no one else upon Barsoom knew the secret of these awful locks. For 3 days, men crazed with fear have searched about this portal in vain attempts to solve its mystery. I had no time to talk. I was becoming very weak, and it was with difficulty that I controlled my mind at all. With a final effort, as I sank weakly to my knees, I hurled the 9 thought waves at that awful thing before me. The Martian had crawled to my side, and with staring eyes fixed on the single panel before us, we waited in the silence of death. Slowly, the mighty door receded before us. I attempted to rise and follow it, but I was too weak. "After it!" I cried to my companion, "and if you reach the pump room, turn loose all the pumps. It is the only chance Barsoom has to exist tomorrow." From there I opened the second door, and then the third, and as I saw the hope of Barsoom crawling weakly on hands and knees through the last doorway, I sank unconscious upon the ground. Yeah, of course, it's John Carter that's going to save the day, but it must necessarily be at the last possible instant. Yeah. Alright, so we have, I think, just 1 chapter remaining. Yes. So, let's see how this ends. So, we have now chapter 28 at the Arizona Cave. So where things begin, they end, I suppose. It was dark when I opened my eyes again. Strange, stiff garments were upon my body. Garments that cracked and powdered away from me as I rose to a sitting posture. I felt myself over from head to foot, and from head to foot I was clothed. Though when I fell unconscious in the little doorway, I had been naked. Before me was a small patch of moonlit sky, which showed through a ragged aperture. As my hands passed over my body, they came in contact with pockets, and in one of these a small parcel of matches wrapped in oiled paper. One of these matches I struck, and its dim flame lighted up what appeared to be a huge cave, toward the back of which I discovered a strange, still figure huddled over a tiny bench. As I approached it, I saw that it was the dead and mummified remains of a little old woman with long black hair, and the thing it leaned over was a small charcoal burner, upon which rested a round copper vessel containing a small quantity of greenish powder. Behind her, depending from the roof upon rawhide thongs and stretching entirely across the cave, was a row of human skeletons. From the thong which held them stretched another to the dead hand of the little woman. As I touched the cord, the skeletons swung to the motion with a noise as of the rustling of dry leaves. It was a most grotesque and horrid tableau, as I hastened out into the fresh air, glad to escape from so gruesome a place. He's in a cave, not an old Sears. The sight that met my eyes as I stepped out upon a small ledge which ran before the entrance to the cave filled me with consternation. A new heaven and a new landscape met my gaze. The silvered mountains in the distance, the almost stationary moon hanging in the sky, the cacti-studded valley below me were not of Mars. I could scarce believe my eyes, but the truth slowly forced itself upon me. I was looking upon Arizona, from the same ledge from which 10 years before I had gazed with longing upon Mars. Burying my head in my arms, I turned, broken and sorrowful, down the trail from the cave. Above me shone the red eye of Mars, holding her awful secret, 48 million miles away. Did the Martian reach the pump room? Did the vitalizing air reach the people of that distant planet in time to save them? Was my Dejathoris alive? Or did her beautiful body lie, cold in death, beside the tiny golden incubator, in the sunken garden of the inner courtyard of the Palace of Tardos Mors, the Jadak of Helium? For 10 years I have waited and prayed for an answer to my questions. For 10 years I have waited and prayed to be taken back to the world of my lost love. I would rather lie dead beside her there than live on Earth, all those millions of terrible miles from her. The old mine, which I found untouched, has made me fabulously wealthy. But what care have I for wealth? As I sit here tonight, in my little study overlooking the Hudson, just 20 years have elapsed since I first opened my eyes upon Mars. I can see her, shining in the sky, through the little window by my desk. And tonight, she seems to be calling me again, as she has not called before since that long dead night. I think I can see, across that awful abyss of space, a beautiful, black-haired woman standing in the garden of a palace. And at her side is a little boy who puts his arms around her as she points into the sky toward the planet Earth, while at their feet is a huge and hideous creature with a heart of gold. I believe that they are waiting there for me, and something tells me that I shall soon know. All right, that brings us to the end of... the end of A Princess of Mars. Let's go back to the title here. There we go. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of A Princess of Mars, the first book in the Barsoom series featuring John Carter of Mars. I like how this one ended, despite the very obvious contrivance of how how he had forgotten conveniently that it was entirely within his power to save Mars, but the details. It was... The ending left things mostly closed off with the possibility of furtherance. It very well could have been that this was all there was, and it would have been fine. But it also was reasonably well open to extending the series. And, as we know, extend it he did. I think there were like 10 of these books. So, this was the story of John Carter's first visit to Mars. Whether each of these books will be self-contained within each, so he'll be going to and from Mars with each book, or the next time will be a more permanent stay, that's entirely to be discovered later on. I know absolutely nothing about the series, if I'm being entirely honest. So, it was good. It was very campy in all of the fun, old sci-fi sort of ways. It reminds me of, like, Flash Gordon and things like that, which, obviously, Flash Gordon and such probably took a great deal of inspiration from this, being just adventure stories set in space. And yeah, you can really tell it's the same author as Tarzan. It feels very, very alike. It's got the same soul to it. No, I refuse to watch the John Carter movie because that is a blasphemy against the John Carter series. It was apparently god-awful and an affront to anyone with eyes to see it. The fact that that got greenlit was shocking. Oh god. War of the Worlds was also really, really bad. And that says a lot when... So, the original book, War of the Worlds, was okay. But then you take it from... You think that there were two things spawned from that book, and I couldn't tell you which is the worst. Was it the movie, or was it Scientology? They're both a blight upon the earth, but I don't know which is the worst. Yeah, ooh, yeah, ooh. Like, I enjoy B movies. War of the Worlds was put forth as supposed to be a blockbuster of the season, and man, oh man, was it bad. Oh god. Yeah, I've lucked out enough to not run into any real Scientologists. At least none that have been out in the open with it. Bone sickness. If it's in contention for the worst ever, I will take your word for it. I try not to indulge in masochistic tendencies, particularly with consumption of media. See, we just talked about this. Gotta lay off. Be kind to yourself. If you're not kind to yourself, who will be? Don't make yourself watch this. It's okay. You can let it go. Well, screaming stupid shit about Tom Cruise and John Travolta is just, another Tuesday. But fair. All right, guys. So, what do we want to read next? I haven't the foggiest idea. Mercy. I don't know that I'm familiar with that one, but if it's a Discord watch-along, it's like 50-50 of whether it's going to be absolutely terrible or one for the ages. I did some in one of my other servers, I used to do like some anime movie watch-alongs. We'd do like Jinro and things like that, like classics that people really need to see. But, ooh. Oh, okay. Chris Pratt paycheck movie. Fair enough, fair enough. You mean like Mario? See, I haven't been near a pilgrimage spot for Scientologists. The closest I've got to that was near where I grew up was where the Juggalos would have their gatherings, which, funny enough, the family much better than Scientologists, much better. Juggalos are crazy, but long as you leave them alone, don't cause any problems. Yeah, they're mostly good people. They're anti-fascists, and you know what? That's a leg up in my book. As long as you don't get in with the ones who are more on the anarchist side of things, and that whole image is really just a war against drugs hack job that they're trying to frame them badly. So, meh. If I see a hatchet man, I'm more likely to be friendly to someone than if I see them wearing a red hat. Damn, we have been all sorts of in it tonight. What was in this gin? All right, so Back on topic. This has been Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars, the first book in the Barsoom series, where we were introduced to John Carter of Mars and his beloved Dejah Thoris, and more importantly, the ever-loyal and ever-loving Woola, the ugly little Martian dog that really was the star of the show. So, what do we read next? Our next regular classics reading will be on Tuesday. So we've got a day to decide. If you have anything that you've been meaning to read, an old favorite that you want to inflict upon me, something to share that has a special place in your heart from years ago, something French that you think will be amusing to hear me try to pronounce, whatever the case may be, feel free to toss us a suggestion or request, whether it be over on Bluesky, over on the comments or posts on YouTube. I don't know if Twitch has a convenient way to get in touch with creators, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm always open to suggestions. I'll find something to read, regardless, but I tend to find myself into comfortable grooves. That's not to say that reading comfortable works is bad, but you do get a much broader perspective if you read what other people ask you to. That could be that's a dangerous, slippery slope, but anyway. If you have any suggestions, feel free to pass them along. And otherwise, feel free to just join us. Our next reading will be on Tuesday. And where we'll be reading, I don't know, something. And then our next unarchived reading will be on Saturday, where we will be starting our new series, reading the first book in the Hyperion Cantos, in respect to the recently passed author of said work. This is one of the shining gems of sci-fi, so we're going from the campy early sci-fi to high sci-fi next. I'm excited. It's one that I've been meaning to read for a long time. So, look forward to that on Saturday for a nice 4-hour session, and then we'll be having our regular sessions for the Tuesday and Friday readings as we begin our next classic. Until then, if you're over on YouTube, I would appreciate a like on the channel, and maybe a subscription to, or a like on the stream, and maybe a subscription to the channel. It helps the algorithm know that we're doing some good things, and directs new friends to discover us, because it's always a good thing to expand a little bit of awareness of literature, even the campy ones that are generally regarded as pulp fiction. Especially the campy ones, honestly. Let's be real. If Harlequin romance can introduce a generation to reading, we can at least appreciate some pulp sci-fi. If you're over on Twitch, a follow on the channel will be appreciated. We're just getting started. We started at the end of January, and we are up to 17 people, I think, right now. So we are churning right along, having a good momentum, and really just having a good time together. Let's see if anyone is reading tonight. I do like to have our raids be in theme. So, let's see. Same category. Is anyone reading tonight? There are writings. There are... Let's see, some writing. Oh, somebody's reading Anne of Green Gables. They've been going for about 2 hours. They're probably toward the end of their session. Somebody's reading some reverse 1999 stuff. Oh, there's Honey Toasty that was reading that we ran into a couple weeks ago. Yeah, let's go back to Honey. She was nice. So, we'll be raiding into Honey Toasty, who we've raided into before. So, give her our best. And until next time, I thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Oh, well, okay, maybe not. She is, I think, either not accepting raids at the moment or something. Whether it be just we're under the limit, we only have 4 of us tonight, or whatever. Anyway, that just simplifies things because I didn't see anybody else that was reading books. So, we're just gonna have a nice, casual Sunday. As always, thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you next time when we read something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right. Good night, everyone.